Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, let me give you a quick rundown on what we're all about. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive focused commander decks. A focused commander deck is more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Today's episode is going to be a special one though, where we exclude the cost of the commander. With just a $25 budget, it's pretty much impossible to build around some commanders unless we do so. Sometimes you get lucky and open up a commander in a pack, or you could just trade for them if you really want to build around them. So our budget is still going to be $25, but again, that's $25 for just 99 cards because we're excluding the cost of that commander. And prices on this show are powered by our sponsor, TCGPLAYER. Before we get started today though, make sure you go check out our new Golden Pig playmat on thecommandersquarters.com. And thank you to everyone who's already purchased one, it really does help support the channel. Also, make sure that you subscribe to the channel and click that little bell notification icon so that you can stay up to date in the latest Commander's Quarters episodes. Today's commander is Teysa Karlov. Teysa is a 2/4 human advisor that costs 2 white/black. She has, if a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Creature tokens you control have vigilance and lifelink. Personally, I've been waiting a long time for a Death Matters commander, and Teysa is the perfect fit. Her first ability is an amazing addition to an Aristocrat style deck. And her second ability is just icing on the cake, and it helps you stay alive longer with that lifelink. So what's the strategy for this deck? Well, we want to get set up and then start doubling up all of our death triggers. So when I say get set up, I mean more than just getting Teysa out onto the battlefield. We also need to get the creatures out that we want to die, our sacrifice outlets, and the things that will trigger off of those deaths. And then how do we win with this deck? Well, we're either going to overwhelm our opponents with our tokens, or we're going to drain them out. Teysa is an amazing card because it doubles up every single one of our death triggers. With her in play, it really speeds up the kill clock on our opponents and things can get out of control quickly. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. So let's go on to tactic number 1, Stone Cold. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for a basic land to put into play tapped. Then we've got some good forms of early ramp with Mind Stone, Prismatic Lens, and Sphere of the Suns. Mind Stone can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 1 to tap and sacrifice it to draw a card. So it can help us early on in the game, and it can also be of value to us later on in the game too. And then there's Prismatic Lens, which either taps for a colorless, or we can filter our mana. And next up is Sphere of the Suns, which enters the battlefield tapped with 3 charge counters on it. We can then tap it to remove one of those charge counters to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. So this card is great at some additional fixing and ramp, but we can use it all up. And then there's Marble Diamond, which enters the battlefield tapped. It can tap for a white. Next up is Star Compass, which also enters the battlefield tapped. It can tap for either of our colors depending on our land situation. And then Orzhov Signet is a fantastic mana rock. We can pay 1 into it to tap for white/black. Next up is Orzhov Locket, which we can tap for either white or black, and then we can pay 4 Orzhov into it to tap and sacrifice it to draw 2 cards. While this is slower than our other mana rocks, it does provide us some good additional value late game. And then there's Revel in Riches, which works fantastically with Teysa's ability. It's an enchantment that gives us a treasure anytime a creature an opponent controls dies. And then at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 10 or more treasures, we win the game. Now this card is good on its own, but with Teysa in play, it's going to give us 2 treasures instead of 1. So this is a fantastic form of ramp for us, and it's also a great secondary win condition. With this in play, it only takes 5 of our opponent's creatures dying to get us 10 treasures. Although Revel in Riches is a great card in this deck, it's still not the Golden Pig. The Golden Pig is the number 1 card out of our 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Pitiless Plunderer. Pitiless Plunderer is a 1/4 human pirate for 3 and a black. It has, whenever another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So unlike Revel in Riches, this is going to give us a treasure whenever one of our own creatures die. And with Teysa in play, we're going to get 2 treasures instead of 1. This deck revolves around our own creatures dying, so this is a much more consistent form of ramp. With this card in play, we can have some very explosive turns. We've got plenty of creatures in this deck that give us creature tokens whenever they die. So with Teysa in play, when we sacrifice one of those creatures, not only do we get 2 more creatures, but we also get 2 treasures. And then if we sacrifice those 2 creature tokens, we get 4 more treasures. That's an incredible amount of value that can easily win us the game with the right setup. And that's what makes Pitiless Plunderer the Golden Pig of this deck. So what are some of those creatures that give us other creatures when they die? Let's go through them now in tactic number 2, the replacements. First up, we've got Hunted Witness, which when it dies, we're going to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. And then Doomed Traveler is going to do the exact same thing, but it's going to create a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying. Again, as long as Teysa's in play, we're going to get twice as many of these tokens. So we're also going to be running Imperious Oligarch and Orzhov Enforcer, both of which have Afterlife 1. Afterlife 1 means that when this creature dies, we get to create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. And then there's Martyr of Dusk, which when it dies, we create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. Next up, there's Mirror Sire, which when it dies, we create a 1/1 colorless mirror artifact creature token. And when Carrier Thrall dies, we get to put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion creature token onto the battlefield that we can even sacrifice for a colorless. And then we've got some creatures that create some slightly bigger threats when they die. When Doom Dissenter dies, we create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Next up is Sultai Emissary, and when it dies, we get to manifest the top card of our library. And then there's some creatures that produce multiple tokens when they die. Ministrant of Obligation has Afterlife 2, so when it dies, it creates 2 of those spirits. And then when Hallowed Spirit Keeper dies, we're going to put X 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield, where X is the number of creature cards in our graveyard. Again, this deck revolves around getting creatures onto the battlefield and then sacrificing them so we can have plenty of creatures in our graveyard for this guy. Finally, there's Flesh Carver, which can serve a dual purpose for this deck. First off, we can pay 1 into black to sacrifice another creature to put 2+1/+1 counters on it. And then when it dies, we get to put an XX black horror creature token onto the battlefield where X is its power. So not only will this get us a creature token when it dies, but it's also a sacrifice outlet for us. Now each and every single one of these creatures is going to produce twice as many tokens when Teysa is on the board. But we've got some even bigger effects to create more and more creature tokens. So let's go on to tactic number 3, a life for a life. First up is Zathrud Necromancer, which has whenever it or another human you control dies, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield tapped. Now this isn't a tribal deck, but there are plenty of humans in this deck, so this is going to trigger quite often. And then there's Pawn of Ulamog, which has whenever it or another non-token creature you control dies, you may create a 0/1 colorless Eldrazi spawn creature token. It has sacrifice this creature, add colorless to your mana pool. Next up is Sifter of Skulls, which does the exact same thing, except it doesn't count itself, and then also it's going to put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Scion onto the battlefield. With either of these cards in play, the deck can get out of control very quickly. Because whenever one of our creatures dies, we're going to get more and more creatures that we can sacrifice for mana and get more effects. And then there's Open the Graves, which says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So unlike Pawn of Ulamog and Sifter of Skulls, this is an enchantment, so it's going to be harder for our opponents to deal with. On top of that, it's going to be creating 2/2s, which can be a little more threatening. Next up is Field of Souls, which says whenever a non-token creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Requiem Angel is similar, but it can be even better in the right situation. It has whenever another non-spirit creature token you control dies, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. So Requiem Angel doesn't care if it's a token or non-token creature. So this helps us double up on any effects that create creature tokens that aren't spirits. Next up is Lightning Coils, which says whenever a non-token creature you control is put into a graveyard from play, put a charge counter on Lightning Coils. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, if Lightning Coils has 5 or more charge counters on it, remove all of them from it and then put that many 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste into play. Exile them at the beginning of the next end step. So with our commander in play, we're going to get twice as many charge counters on Lightning Coils whenever one of our non-token creatures dies. Also, when she's in play, all of these elementals are going to have lifelink and they're going to swing in and gain us a ton of life. On top of that, we've got plenty of sacrifice outlets so that we can get some additional use out of these before they're exiled. Finally, there's Ogre Slumlord, which says whenever another non-token creature dies, you may put a 1/1 black rat creature token onto the battlefield, and rats you control have Death Touch. So Ogre Slumlord not only cares whenever one of our non-token creatures dies, but also when one of our opponent's creatures dies too. On top of that, those rats are going to have Death Touch, so it makes it very hard for our opponents to actually block them. So creating a ton of creature tokens is great, but how do we keep things going? Let's see some ways to do that in tactic number 4, draw the short straw. First up, there's Corpse Augur, which when it dies, we draw X cards and lose X life, where X is the number of creature cards in target player's graveyard. Again, with Teysa in play, we're going to get this effect twice so we can draw a ton of cards. And life loss for this deck isn't really that big of a problem since we've got plenty of ways to gain that life back. Next up is Smothering Abomination, which won't trigger twice off of Teysa, but it is going to draw us a card whenever we sacrifice a creature. It does force us to sacrifice one creature at the beginning of our upkeep, but that's no big deal for this deck. Then there's Gate to the Afterlife, which says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, you gain 1 life, then you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So while this technically doesn't give us card advantage, it does help us get rid of any dead cards in our hand. Next up is Midnight Reaper, which says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, it's going to deal 1 damage to you, and then you draw a card. Grim Haruspex isn't going to deal you any damage, but it's only going to draw you cards whenever another non-token creature you control dies. And then Dark Prophecy is perhaps one of our best forms of draw for this deck. It says whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card and lose 1 life. So although we do lose life, this is going to draw us a ton of cards because it even counts our tokens. And then there's Harvester of Souls, which says whenever another non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. So like Ogre Slumlord, this even cares about our opponent's non-token creatures. Finally, there's Heirloom Blade, which says whenever a equipped creature dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card that shares a creature type with it. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Now we do have to pay 1 to equip this to a creature, but it's going to get us a ton of value. Again, this isn't a tribal deck, but there are plenty of creatures that share creature types. Now, drawing cards is great, but tutoring for the right card for the right situation is even better. So let's go through some ways to do that in tactic number 5, 4 on the floor. First up is Dimir Houseguard, which serves a dual purpose for this deck. We can sacrifice a creature to regenerate it, or we can transmute it for 1 black. When we transmute it, we're going to discard it and then search our library for any card with 4 converted mana cost and put it directly into our hand. So this card can either be an excellent sacrifice outlet for us, or it can be a tutor that gets us the perfect card for the right situation. Another great tutor for this deck is Flesh Writher. Flesh Writher has Transfigure for 1 black. So by sacrificing it, we can search our library for a creature with a converted mana cost of 4 and put it directly into play. So once we're all set up, we can go get that perfect card that's going to win us the game. If we need a sacrifice outlet, we can go get something like Dimir Houseguard. If we need some extra mana ramp, we can go get our Golden Pig. Or if we need to drain out our opponents, we can get one of our creatures that does that. So what are some creatures that do that though? Let's go through them now in tactic number 6, down the drain. First up, there's Blood Artist and Falkenrath Noble, both of which do the exact same thing. Whenever they or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. All of these creatures are great on their own, but they're doubly effective when Teysa's in play. So we're also going to be running Pious Evangel, which has whenever it or another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. We can also pay 2 and tap it to sacrifice another permanent to transform Pious Evangel into Wayward Disciple. Wayward Disciple has whenever it or another creature we control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. So although this takes a little more work to get to, it's still a fantastic card in this deck. Next up is Zulaport Cutthroat, which has whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Vindictive Vampire is very similar. It has whenever another creature you control dies, Vindictive Vampire deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. What makes both of these cards especially effective is they hit every single one of our opponents. Next up is Vizkopa Guildmage, which has pay 1 white black. Whenever you gain life this turn, each opponent loses that much life. Again, there are plenty of ways for this deck to gain life, and it's even just as simple as swinging with our tokens because they're going to have lifelink when Teysa's in play. And then there's Epicure of Blood, which has whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So unlike Vizkopa Guildmage, this effect is only going to trigger off of separate instances of life gain, but it does have the added benefit that we don't have to pay for that effect. We've talked a lot about how much this deck revolves around its commander, so we need to make sure that we can protect her. Let's go through some ways to do that in tactic number 7, take a bullet for you. First up, there's Martyr's Cause, which is an enchantment that says sacrifice a creature. The next time a source of your choice would deal damage to any target this turn, prevent that damage. So not only can this protect our commander from lethal damage, it's also an incredible sacrifice outlet. Not only can it sacrifice creatures for free, but it's also an enchantment, so it's harder for our opponents to deal with. But then there's Fanatical Devotion, which is even better. It's an enchantment that says sacrifice a creature, regenerate target creature. So this can protect our commander and any of our other key creatures from board wipes and kill spells. Next up is Dark Privilege, which is an aura that says sacrifice a creature, regenerate enchanted creature. So as long as we can get this onto Teysa, we're going to be pretty set in keeping her alive. And on top of that, we turn her into the sacrifice outlet that we need. Finally, there's Spirit Bonds, which says whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay white. If you do, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. And then you can pay 1 and a white to sacrifice a spirit to give target non-spirit creature indestructible until the end of the turn. So not only can this generate tokens for us, it's also a sacrifice outlet that can protect our creatures. But we've got some even better sacrifice outlets in this deck, so let's go through them now in tactic number 8, Outlet Maul. First up, there's Carrion Feeder, which can't block, but we can sacrifice a creature with it to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then there's Bloodthrone Vampire, which allows us to sacrifice a creature to give it +2/+2 until the end of the turn. Next up, we've got a couple of sacrifice outlets that are harder for our opponents to kill. Cartel Aristocrat can sacrifice another creature to give it protection from the color of our choice until the end of the turn. And then Pitiless Pontiff has pay 1, sacrifice another creature. Pitiless Pontiff gains Death Touch and indestructible until the end of the turn. Next up is Yahenni Undying Partisan, which is not only a fantastic sacrifice outlet, but it can also be a huge threat too. It has haste, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, we get to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then we can sacrifice another creature to give Yahenni indestructible until the end of the turn. And then there's Hidden Stockpile, which has Revolt. At the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. And then we can pay 1 to sacrifice a creature to scry 1. So not only can this be a great sacrifice outlet, but can even give us some more tokens too. Finally, there's Krav the Unredeemed, which partners with Ragnar the Redeemer. It has pay a black, sacrifice X creatures, target player draws X cards and gains X life, and then we put X +1/+1 counters on Krav. This is a very cheap and efficient way for us to sacrifice a ton of creatures at once and draw a ton of cards. On top of that, that life gain works very well with Ragnar because she has at the beginning of each end step, if your team gain life this turn, create 2 1/1 white warrior creature tokens. Make sure you take note that this says at the beginning of each end step, not just your own. So with the right setup and Ragnar in play, we can create a ton of creature tokens. So we've gone through a lot of key creatures in this deck, but what happens when one of them dies and we need to get them back? Let's go through some ways to do that now in tactic number 9, That Takes Me Back. First up, there's Dutiful Attendant, which has whenever it dies, return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So with our commander in play, this is going to trigger twice, so we're going to get 2 creatures back for the price of this one dying. Speaking of great deals, there's Revel Arc. Revel Arc says when it leaves the battlefield, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Again, with Teysa in play, this is actually going to trigger twice, so we're going to get 4 creatures back for the price of this one dying. And finally, there's Rally the Ancestors, which is an instant that says return each creature card with converted mana cost X or less for your graveyard to the battlefield, exile those creatures at the beginning of the next end step, exile Rally the Ancestors. This card is an amazing finisher for this deck. It can get us a ton of creatures back all at once, and then we can just sacrifice those creatures to finish off our opponents. Now these cards are great, but sometimes we need to deal with some of our opponents' things too. Let's go through some ways to do that in tactic number 10, dealing with it. First up, there's Archon of Justice, which has, whenever it dies, exile target permanent. This is another fantastic effect to double up with Teysa. And again, if we've got a way to recur Archon of Justice, that's even better. Finally, we're going to be running Butcher of Malakir, which is a fantastic card in an Aristocrats deck. It says whenever it or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Again, this deck thrives on sacrificing creatures, and we're going to get this trigger twice when Teysa's in play. Teysa is a fantastic commander and a lot of fun to play. If we have the right setup, we can do some pretty amazing things with this deck. But now that we've gone through the cards that help us win with this deck, let's go through the cards that help make it happen. It's time to go on to the mana base. First up, there's Aether Hub, which when it enters the battlefield, we get an energy. We can either tap Aether Hub for a colorless, or we can tap and pay that 1 energy to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And then we've got Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice to search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. Next up is Warp Landscape, which we can either tap for a colorless, or we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice it to search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. And then there's Tainted Field, which we can either tap for a colorless, or we can tap it for a white or black mana if we control a swamp. Next up is Vivid Marsh and Vivid Meadow, both of which enter the battlefield tapped with 2 charge counters on them. We can either tap them for their color, or tap them to remove a charge counter from them to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. And then we've got Forsaken Sanctuary, Orzhov Guildgate, and Scoured Barrens, each of which enter the battlefield tapped and tap for either a white or black mana. On top of that, Scoured Barrens is going to gain us 1 life when it comes into play. Next up is Orzhov Basilica, which when it enters the battlefield, it enters tapped, and it's going to make us return a land back to our hand. It does have the upside, though, of tapping for white-black. And finally, we're going to be running 24 basic lands, 15 of those will be swamps, and 9 will be plains. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGPLAYER optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. Since this is a brand new commander, EDH Rec actually doesn't have any decks built with her yet. But I can guarantee that once EDH Rec does have those deck prices, it's going to be much more expensive than our deck, which comes in at just $24.98. And just a quick reminder that our deck cost did not include the commander because it's a commander excluded episode. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned in focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, there's Viserys here, which comes in at $1.95. It's a 1/1 Vampire Wizard for a black that says sacrifice a creature, scry 1. This is an incredible sacrifice outlet and a great addition to any Aristocrat style deck. And then there's Skull Clamp, which comes in at $2.58. Skull Clamp is an equipment that costs 1 and it costs 1 to equip. It gives the equipped creature +1/-1, and whenever a equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards. This card is especially incredible with Teysa in play because it's going to let us draw 4 cards instead of 2. Next up is Black Market, which comes in at $4.41. It's an enchantment that costs 3 black, and it says whenever a creature dies, put a charge counter on Black Market. And at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, add black to your mana pool for each charge counter on Black Market. Again, Teysa is going to double up the number of charge counters that Black Market gets whenever one of our creatures dies, so we're going to get a ton of mana off of this. And then there's Anointed Procession, which comes in at $9.14. It's an enchantment that costs 3 and a white, and it says if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many of those tokens instead. With this in play, our board can get out of control very quickly since we're going to be doubling up our number of tokens from its trigger and from Teysa's trigger too. Next up is Teysa Orzhov Sign, which comes in at $4.17. She's a 2/3 human advisor that costs 1 white black. She has sacrifice 3 white creatures, remove target creature from the game. And whenever another black creature you control is put into a graveyard from play, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying into play. So not only is this Teysa a fantastic sacrifice outlet, but this is also an amazing token generator. Finally, there's Dictate of Erebos, which comes in at $6.92. It's an enchantment with flash that costs 3 black, and it says whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Like Butcher of Malakir, this can get rid of our opponent's boards very quickly. And with that, our show is coming to a close, but I really just want to hear about what you think about this deck, so why don't you let me know in the comments below. When you're buying decks like this one, or just individual cards, make sure you use that decklist link in the description below. Not only will you be getting great prices on TCGPLAYER, but you're also going to be supporting this show because they sponsor us. And make sure that you follow us on social media so you can get some early hints on who the next commander just might be. Links to our social media accounts can be found in the description. Also in the description below is a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron for the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck techs. There's even a general level tier where you get your own personalized deck tech dedicated to you. I truly couldn't do this without all of your support, so from the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel, and then check out some of our playlists on budget commander decks, commander excluded decks, and break the bank episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.